What if a wealthy man, surrounded by fortune, still couldn't find peace, and in the innocent eyes of a poor little girl lay the secret that would change his life forever? This is a story of hidden pain, lost bonds, and the moment when one truth turns everything upside down. In the end, who will cry and whose world will fall apart? This is not just a story, it's a piece of someone's hidden pain quietly waiting to be heard. In today's story, we dive into a moment that can change everything, in the most unexpected way. Before we begin, where are you listening from? Canada? The US? Norway? Let us know in the comments, because stories may begin anywhere, but they connect us all. Stay with us until the very end, because sometimes, what breaks your heart can also heal it. And if you believe stories can change lives, hit subscribe. Join our journey. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment. Your voice matters here. The mansion was silent at night, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Billionaire Alexander Harrington lay in his king-sized bed, pretending to sleep. His chest rose and fell with practiced rhythm. His eyes shut, but his ears were sharp, listening. For weeks he had noticed something strange. His maid Maria had been working tirelessly, always polite, never asking for more. But her young daughter, Isabella, was different, quiet, withdrawn with eyes too old for her age. She hardly spoke, except in whispers to her mother. And when Alexander passed her by, she always looked down, clutching her worn teddy bear as if it were her last shield from the world. But that wasn't what troubled him most. It was the sounds. At night, when the house should have been still, he sometimes heard muffled cries. At first, he thought it was a dream. But then, one evening, while pretending to doze in the study, he caught a glimpse of Isabella sneaking through the halls, her little hands carrying something close to her chest. He could have ignored it. After all, what business was it of his what a maid's daughter did at night? But something about the way her small frame shook, the way she hurried like a child running from ghosts, gnawed at him. So tonight, Alexander made a decision. He would pretend to sleep and wait. The truth, he suspected, might break the walls of his carefully controlled world. What he didn't know was that the secret Isabella carried would change his life forever. Alexander Harrington was a man of steel and glass. His business empire stretched across continents, real estate, luxury resorts, and technology firms. To the world, he was untouchable, a billionaire who sat in towering boardrooms, his decisions shaping cities. Yet inside his sprawling estate on the outskirts of Manhattan, silence was his closest companion. His late wife, Eleanor, had died 6 years ago in a tragic car accident. Since then, Alexander had built walls taller than his mansion. He kept people at a distance, entertained acquaintances rather than friends, and filled his days with work rather than laughter. The Harrington estate had everything: ornate chandeliers, imported marble, private gardens, but no warmth. The only voices that lingered were those of the staff. Among them, Maria was the most trusted. She had worked for him for years, her loyalty quiet and steady. She never intruded, never complained, and raised her daughter with dignity despite her modest wages. Isabella, only 10 years old, often lingered in the shadows of the mansion, like a ghost drifting through golden halls. It was Isabella who unsettled Alexander. One evening, while reviewing contracts in his study, he had heard it again, a faint sob. Closing the documents, he followed the sound down the corridor, past oil paintings of ancestors whose stern eyes watched him with disapproval. He paused at the library door and saw a sliver of movement. Isabella was inside, sitting cross-legged on the floor, clutching a notebook. She didn't see him. Her face was pale, her cheeks wet. She was sketching furiously with a broken pencil. Her drawings weren't childish doodles, but haunting images: dark storm clouds, shadowed figures, and broken glass. When her mother's footsteps echoed down the hall, Isabella shoved the notebook into her dress and wiped her eyes. By the time Maria opened the door, Isabella was standing teddy bear in hand, as if nothing had happened. That image of the girl lingered in Alexander's mind. He had known pain, but hers was different, raw, hidden, deeper than a child should ever bear. That was why tonight, as the rain tapped against the windows, Alexander lay in bed, pretending to sleep. The lamp beside him flickered once before the storm cut it off, plunging the room into darkness. He let his breathing slow. The clock ticked past midnight. Then he heard it, the faintest creak of a floorboard. His heart tightened. Carefully, he slit one eye open just enough to see the door. The light from the hallway revealed a small figure creeping inside Isabella. Her teddy bear dangled in one hand, but her other hand clutched that same worn notebook. Her steps were cautious, as though she feared waking a sleeping beast. She came closer, until she stood beside his bed. For a long moment, she just stared at him. Her lips trembled, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. Then she did something that made his breath catch. She opened the notebook and placed it gently on his nightstand. And in a whisper so soft it almost broke him, she said, "Please help me." Alexander's world shifted in that instant. Alexander didn't move. His instincts as a businessman told him to stay perfectly still, to observe before revealing. Years of negotiation had trained him to read the silence between words, to wait until the right moment. Yet this was not a boardroom. This was a child, trembling in the shadows of his bedroom, whispering for help. His heart, though hardened by grief, felt something it hadn't in years, an ache. He kept his breathing slow, pretending to remain asleep, but his mind raced. Why would she bring him this notebook? Why whisper such a desperate plea to a man she barely spoke to during the day? Isabella clutched her teddy bear tightly, as if it were the only thing keeping her together. For a moment she lingered beside his bed, eyes darting toward the door as though afraid someone might appear. Then she turned and padded quietly away, leaving the notebook behind. When her footsteps faded, Alexander slowly opened his eyes and reached for the worn object. Its cover was frayed, corners bent from years of use. He opened it and froze. Page after page was filled with drawings and words scrawled in shaky handwriting. There were sketches of dark figures towering over a small child, houses that looked like cages and faces without mouths. The words beside them were short, haunting sentences. Don't tell. They'll be angry. She cries when no one sees. The shadows come at night. Alexander's throat tightened as he flipped further. On one page, a figure sat in a giant chair, faceless, while a little girl stood far below, reaching up but unable to touch. Beneath it, Isabella had written, "He doesn't see me." He closed the notebook quickly, a chill coursing through him. What did these drawings mean? Who were the shadows? And why did she come to him, of all people? The storm outside roared, lightning cutting across the sky. Alexander sat up in bed, running a hand through his graying hair. He felt the weight of something larger than himself pressing in. He had built empires, but this was a mystery that threatened to unravel him. Unable to sleep, he waited until dawn painted the horizon with pale light. When he finally stepped into the hall, the mansion seemed different. Its polished marble and gold trimmings looked colder, almost accusing. The staff moved about as usual, polishing, cleaning, serving breakfast, but Isabella was nowhere to be seen. Maria entered the dining room with her usual grace, a tired smile on her lips. "Good morning, sir," she said, pouring his coffee. Alexander studied her closely. Her eyes carried exhaustion, but there was something else there, fear, carefully hidden. He thought of the notebook upstairs and almost asked her outright, but instinct told him not to, not yet. Instead, he nodded, pretending to sip his coffee. "And Isabella? Still asleep?" Maria hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. "But he caught it." "Yes, sir. She was tired yesterday." Alexander's chest tightened. That small pause told him more than words could. Later that evening, when the mansion was quiet again, he made his way to the servants' quarters. He stopped outside the small room Maria and Isabella shared. Through the thin door, he heard whispers, a child's voice shaky. Then Maria's, low and urgent. "It's dangerous to tell him," Maria said softly. "We must endure a little longer." "Please, Bella, promise me." Alexander's blood ran cold. "Endure? Tell him what?" Before he could process, the door creaked, and Isabella stepped out, clutching her teddy bear. Her eyes widened when she saw him standing there in the dim hallway. She froze, fear flashing across her face, then whispered the words that made Alexander's heart pound. "He's coming back tonight." Alexander's body stiffened at Isabella's words. "He's coming back tonight." They echoed in his mind like the tolling of a bell. He opened his mouth to ask who she meant, but Isabella pressed a finger to her lips, her small frame trembling. Her teddy bear dangled at her side, its fur matted, its eye missing, as if it had seen every horror she had endured. Before Alexander could speak, Maria appeared in the doorway. Her face drained of color when she saw them together. She quickly pulled Isabella back into the room, shielding her like a mother bird with a fragile wing. "Mr. Harrington," she whispered, her voice uneven. "Please, it's late. Isabella needs rest." Alexander didn't argue. He knew if he pushed too hard, Maria would retreat behind her silence. But the words haunted him as he returned to his room. Who was he? Why did Maria sound so desperate? And why would a child warn him? The night dragged on. Alexander couldn't sleep. He paced his bedroom, the storm of questions in his mind louder than the wind outside. At midnight, he returned to the notebook, combing through its pages. One drawing made his breath catch. A tall man with a cruel smile, eyes drawn like empty pits, standing in the mansion's hall. Next to him, a small girl crouched in shadow. The caption beneath it was simple but chilling. "He takes from us." Alexander clenched his fists. He had seen monsters in boardrooms, men who devoured lives for profit. But this was something darker, something personal. He thought of Eleanor, his late wife, how she had once accused him of being blind to the suffering around him. Perhaps she had been right. Hours later, the creak of the front gate pulled him from his thoughts. His mansion was gated, secured, guarded. No one entered without his permission. Yet, as he peered from his window, he saw a figure slipping inside the estate. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with a predator's confidence. His stomach nodded. Quietly, Alexander descended the stairs, his footsteps silent against the polished marble. The grand hall loomed with shadows, the chandelier above swaying slightly in the draft. He stopped near the archway watching. The man was already inside. His clothes were worn, but his presence was commanding, dangerous. His face carried the sharp lines of anger, his eyes cold and darting. Alexander recognized something immediately. This was not a stranger to the house. He moved with familiarity, as though he had been here before. Maria appeared from the servants' quarters, her face pale as death. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered harshly, blocking the path. The man sneered. "You don't tell me where I can be. You owe me, Maria. Don't forget that." Alexander's blood boiled as he stepped closer, remaining hidden in the shadows. The pieces began to form in his mind: Maria's silence, Isabella's drawings, the whispers of fear. This man, whoever he was the shadow haunting them. Isabella peeked from behind the doorframe, her eyes wide, her tiny hands shaking. The man noticed and grinned wickedly. "There she is," he said. "My sweet girl." Alexander's chest tightened. "My sweet girl." The words were wrong, poisoned with something vile. Maria pushed Isabella back, her voice cracking. "Leave her alone. Please. Just take what you came for and go." The man grabbed Maria's wrist, squeezing until she winced. "Don't test me. You know what happens if I don't get what I want." Before Alexander could think, his anger erupted. He stepped out from the shadows, his voice low but thunderous. "Let her go." The man froze, then turned, his expression shifting from surprise to disdain. He smirked. At the master himself. Finally awake, Alexander's gaze locked on him, fire burning in his chest. "Who are you?" The man's grin widened, showing yellowed teeth. He leaned in, his voice cold and deliberate. "You should know. After all." He glanced at Isabella, then back at Alexander. "She's your daughter too." The words crashed into Alexander like a violent wave. "She's your daughter too." For a moment, the air in the grand hall felt unbreathable. He stared at the stranger, trying to decipher whether this was truth or a cruel manipulation. Maria's face said everything. Her eyes, wide with panic, darted to Alexander and then away, as though hiding something she had carried for years. Isabella clung to the doorframe, her small body trembling. Too young to grasp the full meaning, but old enough to feel the storm in the room. Alexander's chest tightened as he looked at her. Her delicate features, the curve of her chin, the quiet intensity in her eyes. For the first time, he noticed faint traces of familiarity, echoes of Eleanor when she had been a child. Could it be possible? Maria found her voice, though it shook. "Don't listen to him," she pleaded. "He twists everything. He's dangerous." The man chuckled darkly, releasing her wrist but not his dominance. "Dangerous. Or honest. You kept the truth hidden all these years, Maria. Didn't think it would come out, did you? Didn't think he would ever see what you stole?" Alexander's mind swirled. Stole. Truth. My daughter. The questions collided inside him, threatening to fracture his calm exterior. He was a man used to answers, used to control, but here in his own mansion, he felt unmoored. "Explain," he demanded, his voice sharper than he intended. Maria's lips quivered, tears pooling in her eyes. She shook her head. "Not like this. Please, not in front of Isabella." But the man sneered and stepped closer to Alexander. "Do you want the truth, Harrington? Your precious maid wasn't always just a servant. She was more than that once. Ask her. Ask her who she really was to you. Ask her what happened when your wife was alive." The words struck him like blades. Memories began surfacing. Late nights after Eleanor's death, Maria bringing him tea, her quiet presence in moments when grief had nearly consumed him. He had leaned on her kindness more than he cared to admit. Could something have happened, blurred in the fog of pain and whiskey? Maria's tears spilled as she clutched Isabella to her chest. "Enough," she begged. "Don't drag her into this." But Isabella looked up, her small voice breaking the silence. "Mama, is it true? Is he my father?" Alexander's heart clenched. A child should never have to ask such a question, not with fear and desperation in her voice. He wanted to say no, wanted to protect her from the confusion, but he couldn't. He didn't know. The man enjoying every second smirk. That notebook she carries. It's not just drawings. It's her way of screaming the truth no one will say out loud. She deserves to know who she is. And you. His finger jabbed at Alexander's chest. You deserve to pay for abandoning her. The accusation burned. Abandonment. Alexander had never abandoned anyone knowingly. His empire consumed his time, yes, but to think he had unknowingly turned his back on flesh and blood, it gnawed at him. Maria collapsed onto her knees, her sobs tearing through the silence. "Please stop this. You don't understand. You never understood. Alexander, I tried to protect her from him." The man's eyes darkened. "Protect her from me? No, Maria. You just wanted to keep your little secret tucked away in this golden cage. But secrets rot, and now they're mine to use." Before Alexander could react, the man lunged toward Isabella. Maria cried out, throwing herself forward, but Alexander was faster. Years of boardroom battles had not dulled his instincts when something he cared for was threatened. He grabbed the man's arm mid-reach, his grip iron, his voice low with rage. You'll never touch her again." But the man only laughed, leaning closer, his words a dagger. "You can try to protect her, Harrington, but you can't protect yourself from the truth. You're not the savior here. You're the reason she suffers." Isabella's eyes filled with fresh tears, her small voice trembling as she whispered something that silenced them all. "If you're really my father, why did you let the bad man hurt Mama?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Why did you let the bad man hurt Mama? Isabella's eyes, wide and glistening, pierced Alexander's soul in a way no boardroom battle or hostile takeover ever had. He had faced enemies across the world, but never had he felt so powerless. I didn't know." Alexander stammered, the words foreign on his tongue. He was a man who always had answers, but in this moment he had none. "I would never." Maria's sobs cut through his denial. She pulled Isabella close, pressing the girl's head against her chest as if shielding her from a storm. "Bella?" No, he didn't know. He couldn't have known? The man smirked, enjoying the unraveling. But ignorance doesn't erase guilt, does it? He lived in his palace of glass while you bled in silence. He turned away while we. His words hung threateningly, leaving a poisonous trail that Alexander couldn't ignore. Rage burned in Alexander's veins. He tightened his grip on the man's wrist until the intruder winced. "Speak clearly," Alexander demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "What did you do to her?" Maria cried out. "Stop! Don't make him say it!" Her voice cracked under the weight of years of secrets. "Please, Alexander?" Not in front of Bella. But Isabella pulled away from her mother, clutching her teddy bear like a shield. Her voice, though small, was unflinching. "I already know. I saw it. I hear it in my dreams. The bad man hurt her and nobody came." The world tilted. Alexander staggered back a step, his grip loosening. He had thought of himself as a protector, a man who controlled his empire with precision. Yet here in his own home, a child accused him of failing the one person who had stood by him all these years. Maria had suffered, and he, too consumed by grief and wealth, hadn't seen it. "Maria." His voice trembled, the name carrying the weight of guilt. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you come to me?" Maria lifted her tear-streaked face, pain etched into every line. "Because you wouldn't have believed me. You were drowning in your grief for Eleanor. You shut the world out. I was just the maid invisible." "And he?" She shot a glare at the man. "Knew it. He came when you weren't looking. He threatened me, threatened Bella. I thought if I stayed silent I could protect her." Alexander's fists clenched. His empire, his fortune, his power. It meant nothing if the people under his very roof had lived in terror. The man, unfazed by the tension, leaned casually against the banister, his smirk returning. "Touching, isn't it? A family reunion of sorts. But let's not forget the truth, Harrington. That little girl isn't just Maria's secret. She's yours. And that makes her part of all this whether you like it or not." Alexander turned toward Isabella. She stood so small, her face pale but resolute. Her eyes, though filled with tears, carried the strength of someone who had endured far too much. And in her eyes he saw something undeniable. Something of his own blood staring back at him. He swallowed hard. "Bella." The name felt fragile, sacred on his tongue. "If you are my daughter, then I swear to you, no one will ever hurt you again." The man laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. Big promises from a man who couldn't even save his wife. "Do you think words will erase the past?" Alexander's fury flared. "No, but actions will." He lunged forward, shoving the man back against the wall. The intruder snarled, but before the fight could escalate, Maria screamed. "Stop! You don't understand!" Her voice was piercing, desperate. Both men froze, turning to her. Her face was ghostly pale, her eyes full of terror. "It's not just him," she whispered. "He's not the only one. There are others, and they're already inside this house." The words struck like a thunderclap. "There are others, and they're already inside this house." Alexander's heart hammered against his ribs as he scanned the dimly lit hall. The mansion, once a fortress of polished marble and crystal chandeliers, suddenly felt like a cage. The silence was no longer comforting. It was suffocating, as though unseen eyes watched from every shadow. The man smirked, enjoying Maria's outburst. "Well, looks like the maid finally let it slip." He leaned lazily against the wall, his posture deceptively casual. "You think I'd walk in here alone, Harrington? You've built walls of gold, but even the strongest walls have cracks, and I found them." Alexander moved instinctively, stepping in front of Maria and Isabella, his body a shield. For years he had thought his wealth was enough to protect him, but now he realized how fragile it was. A child's whisper had revealed more truth than all the security cameras and guards he paid for. "Who?" Alexander demanded, his voice like steel. "Who else is in my house?" The man only smiled, his silence more dangerous than words. A sudden thud echoed from upstairs, followed by the creak of floorboards. Isabella flinched, clutching her teddy bear so tightly it looked as though it might tear in her hands. Maria's breath quickened, her eyes darting to the staircase. "They're after her." Maria whispered, her voice breaking. They want Bella. That's why I kept everything hidden. That's why I never told you, Alexander. To keep her safe. Alexander's pulse raced. All his life, he had believed money could fix any problem. Lawsuits, enemies, even grief. But this was different. This was his blood, his flesh, if what they said was true. And no amount of money could protect her unless he acted. He moved swiftly, dragging Maria and Isabella behind him toward his study, where he kept a hidden drawer with a weapon. A precaution he had never once thought he'd need inside his own home. But halfway down the corridor, the sound of laughter stopped him cold. It was low, mocking, echoing off the marble walls. Then another voice joined it, and another. Footsteps multiplied, slow and deliberate. Shadows flickered at the end of the hall, stretching taller with each flicker of the storm's lightning outside. From the darkness emerged two more men, their faces hard and cruel. They looked at Isabella the way wolves looked at a lamb. Pretty little girl. One of them drawled. Worth more than gold. Maria gasped, pulling Isabella tighter into her arms. Alexander's rage flared, but beneath it was fear, raw, unshakable fear. For the first time since Eleanor's death, his life was no longer about profit margins or quarterly reports. It was about survival. About saving the child who might be his daughter. Stay behind me, he ordered, his voice firm. But Isabella's tiny voice broke through the chaos, steady and heartbreaking. Papa. The word stunned him. It slipped from her lips naturally, as though she had always known, always felt it deep inside her. Alexander's chest tightened, and in that single word, he found strength he hadn't known he still possessed. The intruders advanced, and Alexander squared his shoulders, ready to fight. But before he could move, Isabella stepped forward, holding out her notebook with trembling hands. "Stop!" she cried, her small voice ringing louder than the storm. "If you want the truth, it's all in here. But if you hurt Mama again, I'll never tell you where the last page is." The men paused, exchanging glances. Even the smirking stranger looked unsettled. Alexander frowned, his mind reeling. The last page? What could a child's notebook possibly hold that would make grown men hesitate? The leader's smirk faltered, and for the first time, fear flickered in his eyes. "You didn't," he muttered. "You couldn't have written it down." Isabella clutched the notebook to her chest, her eyes glistening with tears but blazing with defiance. "I did. And if you hurt us, the one person who can ruin all of you will see it." Alexander's blood ran cold. He looked at her, realizing this was no ordinary notebook. His gaze shifted to Maria, demanding answers. But before she could speak, Isabella whispered something that froze every soul in the hall. "It's about him, and the things he did to Eleanor before she died." The mention of Eleanor's name dropped like a stone into the silence, rippling through the air until the weight of it pressed against every chest in the hall. Alexander staggered back, as though his late wife had been resurrected in the fragile voice of the child before him. What did you say?" His voice cracked, unrecognizable even to himself. Isabella hugged the notebook tightly, her small frame trembling, yet her eyes never left his. "I wrote what I saw, what I heard. Mama didn't know I was awake that night, but I saw him." She pointed at the smirking intruder. "And I heard Eleanor's cries." Alexander's knees nearly buckled. For 6 years he had carried the image of his wife's tragic car accident, a senseless twist of fate on a rainy night. But now doubt tore through the story he had accepted. He turned to Maria, desperate for denial, for reassurance. "Tell me she's wrong. Tell me Eleanor's death wasn't." Maria's tears spilled as she shook her head. "I tried to shield her from it. I thought she was too young to understand. But children see more than we think." The intruder's smirk faltered, but only for a breath. He straightened, his eyes glittering with cruelty. "Careful now, Harrington. Digging into the past won't bring your saintly wife back, and it won't change the fact that your precious maid kept more from you than you could ever imagine." Alexander's chest heaved. His mind reeled with fragments. Late nights Eleanor had spent alone, the bruises Maria had once hidden beneath her sleeves, the whispers he had dismissed as imagination. He wanted to deny it, to tear the truth apart and bury it, but Isabella's trembling voice had shattered his illusions. "What happened to Eleanor?" Alexander roared, his voice echoing against the marble walls. "Tell me the truth." Maria closed her eyes as if bracing for a storm. She knew, she whispered. She knew about the threats, about what he was capable of. That night she tried to leave, to expose him, and she paid with her life. The world tilted. Alexander's heart clenched so violently he thought it might stop. "You're saying?" "Yes." Maria's sobs choked her words. "Eleanor's death wasn't an accident. It was murder." The intruder laughed, sharp and bitter. "You call it murder. I call it business." She knew too much, and people who know too much become liabilities. You of all people should understand that, Harrington. The revelation sliced through Alexander's chest. All the wealth, all the empires he had built, none of it had protected the woman he loved. And now, standing before him was the man responsible. He lunged forward, rage consuming him. But before he could strike, one of the other intruders stepped between them, a knife gleaming in the stormlight. Isabella screamed, clutching Maria's arm, while Alexander froze, his breath ragged. "Easy," the man sneered. "One step closer and the girl bleeds." Alexander's eyes darted to Isabella. Her face was pale, but her grip on the notebook was unyielding. "Papa?" she whispered again, voice shaking but steady. "Don't let them take me. Don't let them take the truth." The word Papa pierced deeper than any blade. For the first time, Alexander understood. She wasn't just asking for safety. She was asking for acknowledgement, for a father who had been absent without knowing. And he, broken and guilty, could no longer deny it. "You won't touch her," Alexander said, his voice trembling but resolute. "Not while I live." The intruder chuckled darkly, his knife still poised. "Then perhaps you won't live long." But before he could move, Isabella took a bold step forward, clutching the notebook to her chest. Her voice rang out, louder than the thunder outside. "If you hurt him, I'll send the last page to the police. Mama showed me where to hide it. She said it would destroy all of you." The men stiffened, panic flashing across their hardened faces. Even the smirking leader's mask slipped. "You little brat," he hissed. Alexander's breath caught. If Eleanor had hidden something that tied her death to these men, then the truth was within reach. But as the storm raged outside, he realized something more terrifying. Isabella was no longer just a witness. She was the key, and keys were what men like this would kill for. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil in Alexander's heart. Lightning cracked through the sky, illuminating the grand estate for fleeting moments before darkness swallowed it again. Inside, silence stretched between him and Maria, a silence that pressed heavier than the thunder outside. He stood across from her in the dimly lit kitchen, his hands still trembling from the conversation that had unfolded. Maria's eyes, wide and glistening with tears, seemed to plead with him for something, perhaps understanding, perhaps forgiveness. "You weren't supposed to know like this," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I've tried to keep her away from all of this from you." Alexander's chest tightened. "From me?" he echoed, his voice low, tinged with disbelief. "Maria, I've given you shelter, security, and trust. Why would you keep your daughter in the shadows of this house, as if she didn't exist? As if you feared me?" Her lips trembled, and she looked away, clutching the edge of the counter as if it were the only thing anchoring her. "Because your world is dangerous," she said finally. "Because your name, your wealth, it attracts eyes that destroy everything they touch. I couldn't let Lily be caught in that. I couldn't let her be seen as just another piece of what you own." The words cut through him, sharp and unyielding. For the first time in years, Alexander felt powerless, stripped of the armor that his fortune usually afforded him. All the deals, the negotiations, the empires built, they meant nothing against the trembling words of a mother protecting her child. But beneath his pain, another feeling was growing: doubt. If Maria feared so much for her daughter's safety, what had truly been happening in the quiet corners of his mansion? Why had Lily been slipping in and out like a shadow? And why, when he pretended to sleep, had she lingered at his bedside as though watching him for reasons far beyond childish curiosity? The questions gnawed at him until he could no longer stay still. He stepped closer, his voice steady but heavy with urgency. "Maria, I need the truth. Not half of it, not the pieces you think I can handle. All of it. Who is Lily's father?" Her entire body froze, as though the question had dragged her into a place she had long avoided. Her eyes lifted to his, and for a fleeting second, he thought he saw recognition there. Something that suggested an answer he had never considered. But she blinked, and the moment passed, leaving only a trembling breath on her lips. "I can't," she whispered, her hands tightening around the counter until her knuckles turned white. "Not tonight." Her refusal stung, but what unsettled Alexander more was the raw terror in her voice. She wasn't hiding the truth out of spite or mistrust. She was hiding it because speaking it out loud would unleash something neither of them was ready for. Before he could press further, a sound broke through the storm, the creak of the floorboards from the hallway. Both turned sharply, hearts racing, and there she was, Lily, her small frame cloaked in her nightgown, her eyes wide and shimmering with unshed tears. She stood there like a ghost caught between worlds, her fragile voice slicing through the tension. "Stop fighting because of me," she said softly, almost pleadingly. The silence that followed was deafening. Maria's face crumpled, tears spilling freely, while Alexander's chest clenched so tightly he could barely breathe. He wanted to rush to the child, to hold her, to tell her she was never the cause of pain. But he remained frozen, struck by the haunting look in her eyes. It wasn't the look of a child who had stumbled upon an argument. It was the look of someone who carried a secret too heavy for her years. A secret that tied her closer to him than he could have ever imagined. As lightning flashed again, illuminating the hallway, Alexander noticed the small silver locket hanging around Lily's neck. It swung slightly with her every breath, glinting in the dim light. His heart skipped when he recognized it, not as a random trinket, but as an heirloom from his own past, one he hadn't seen in years. His blood ran cold. How could she have it? The storm raged louder, but inside the mansion, Alexander's world had already shattered into thunder. The truth was closer than ever, yet still out of reach, hiding behind the fragile silence of a child's lips. And in that silence, Alexander realized the game of shadows was only just beginning. Under the dim chandelier light, Richard sat alone in his study, the fire crackling faintly against the silence. His eyes, bloodshot from lack of sleep, traced the documents sprawled across his desk, records of doctors, bills, court files, and finally, a hospital report stamped with the words, "Terminal." His hands trembled as he clutched the paper, realizing that everything Maria had sacrificed, her dignity, her youth, her future, was because of a battle she had chosen to fight alone. Richard felt a sting in his chest that had nothing to do with business or power. It was shame, a raw ache that he hadn't felt in years. He thought of her daughter's smile, the way she hummed lullabies to herself while carrying trays of food through the hallway, and it became impossible to separate her face from Maria's quiet strength. His thoughts were broken by the faint creak of a floorboard. He looked up sharply. Outside the study door, in the corridor that led to the servant quarters, a shadow lingered. He stilled, pretending once again to return to his papers, but his senses sharpened, listening to the hesitant footsteps moving closer. When the door opened slightly, he caught a glimpse of the small figure, Maria's daughter, clutching something tightly to her chest. "Sir." Her voice trembled, almost too soft to hear. "I didn't mean to disturb you." Richard forced a calm expression. "You're not disturbing me." "What is it?" She hesitated, eyes darting to the floor. Finally, she held out a crumpled envelope. "This was Mama's. I found it. I think it's for you." He took it with unsteady fingers, his heart hammering as though fate itself had just slipped into his hands. Inside was a letter, written in Maria's delicate script, shaky but full of grace. As he read, the walls of his pride cracked around him. "Richard, if you ever find this, I need you to know. I never wanted charity. I wanted dignity. My daughter must not grow up feeling like a burden. If you ever love me, even secretly, I ask one thing only: look after her if I cannot. She has a gift, one that even poverty cannot dim. Do not let her be forgotten." His throat tightened. For the first time in decades, tears blurred his vision. The child standing before him in silence clutched her little hands nervously as though awaiting a verdict. Richard folded the letter carefully, pressing it against his chest. "Does your mother know you gave this to me?" he asked gently. The girl shook her head, her eyes glistening. "Mama doesn't know I found it. She's getting weaker every day. She thinks I don't see it, but I do. I hear her crying at night." Her voice cracked, breaking through the fragile calm she had been holding. "I don't want her to die, sir. Please, you're the only one who can help." Her words cut deeper than the letter. The titan of industry, who had once thought himself untouchable, now stood before a child's desperate plea, and it shattered him. He nodded, his voice low but firm. "I won't let her fight alone anymore." But even as he said it, doubt clawed at him. Maria had kept her distance all these years, rejecting every unspoken offer he might have made. Would she even accept his help now? Or would his presence reopen old wounds she had worked so hard to bury? That night, Richard didn't sleep. He paced the marble floors, his mind waging a war between pride and love, guilt and redemption. He knew the decision he had to make, but he also knew it would not come without cost. By dawn, the household stirred awake, but Richard remained in his study, staring at Maria's letter once more. He whispered to himself, as though Maria were in the room, "You should have told me sooner." Just then, the sound of hurried footsteps reached him. The butler burst into the room, breathless, his usual calm broken. "Sir, it's Maria. She collapsed this morning." Richard's blood ran cold. The paper slipped from his hand, fluttering to the floor. He didn't wait for another word. He rushed through the mansion's hallways, every second echoing like a hammer against his chest, until he reached the servants' quarters where a small crowd had gathered. The maid lay motionless on the bed, her daughter holding her hand, sobbing into the sheets. Richard pushed through, his heart pounding with terror he hadn't felt in years. He knelt beside her, his trembling fingers brushing against her pale skin. Her lips moved faintly, a whisper only he could hear. "Why now, Richard?" The world froze around him. He realized this might be the moment everything changed, or ended forever. The hospital room was quieter than any boardroom Alexander had ever stepped into. Machines hummed softly, their beeps steady and fragile, as though the very rhythm of a heart could be reduced to this delicate sound. Amelia sat at her mother's bedside, clutching her frail hand. Marisol looked smaller than Alexander had ever seen her, her strong and disciplined presence now diminished by illness. But even then, her eyes, though tired, were filled with pride when they met her daughter's. Alexander stood near the door, unsure of where he belonged. For years, He had ruled empires, crushed rivals, and decided the fate of corporations worth billions, yet here, in this sterile room, he felt like an intruder. He had come to check on them, to fulfill a silent duty he couldn't quite name. He told himself it was because Marisol had served his household loyally, but deep inside, he knew the truth. It was because of Amelia, the girl who had stirred something in him that wealth could never buy. Amelia's voice trembled as she whispered, "Mom, you'll get better. You have to." Marisol weakly squeezed her hand. "Minija, you must be strong. No matter what happens, remember you are worth more than the world says. Don't let anyone dim your light." Alexander swallowed hard, his throat tight. He couldn't bear to watch the girl's tears anymore. Quietly, he stepped closer and said, almost against his own will, "She won't face it alone, Marisol. I'll make sure of that." Both women turned to him. Amelia's eyes widened, uncertain whether to see him as savior or stranger. Marisol, however, held his gaze with an intensity that pierced straight through his guarded walls. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why would a man like you care for a girl like her?" The question hit Alexander like a storm. He thought of all the nights he had pretended to sleep, listening to Amelia's quiet laughter, her whispered prayers for her mother, her soft humming when she thought no one could hear. He thought of the way she had carried her pain silently, never asking for pity. For the first time in his life, he didn't have an answer that came wrapped in logic or strategy. "Because she reminds me of something I lost," he finally admitted, his voice cracking. "Because she has more strength than I ever had. And because I can't walk away." Amelia blinked, startled by the rawness of his confession. She had never seen him vulnerable before, and in that moment, the distance between Billionaire and Maid's daughter seemed to collapse. Marisol exhaled slowly, her hand trembling in her daughter's. "Then promise me," she whispered, "that you will guard her, not with money or power, but with the kind of care she deserves." Alexander nodded, a vow forming silently in his chest. "I promise." The days that followed were heavy with grief when Marisol finally passed, but in her absence, something unexpected blossomed. Amelia leaned on Alexander, not as a benefactor, but as someone she slowly began to trust. And Alexander, for the first time since his own childhood, allowed himself to feel the weight of another soul depending on him, not for wealth, not for ambition, but for love and belonging. Months later, the mansion no longer felt as hollow. Laughter echoed through its halls again, not because of parties or business gatherings, but because of a girl who had once lived in the shadows of his wealth. Amelia's presence softened him, taught him patience, reminded him of the humanity he had buried beneath boardroom victories. And sometimes at night, Alexander would still lie in his grand bed, eyes closed, pretending to sleep as Amelia practiced her reading softly nearby or whispered to herself about her dreams. But it was different now. He no longer did it out of suspicion or loneliness. He did it because her voice was the sound of hope, the one thing he had thought was lost forever. The billionaire who once pretended to sleep to test the loyalty of a maid's daughter now stayed awake, cherishing every word she spoke, every dream she dared to believe in. For the first time in his life, Alexander realized he hadn't been watching over her at all. She had been saving him, and that was the result he never expected.
A lonely millionaire, haunted by his past, meets a poor little girl who whispers words that shatter his world. What begins as chance turns into a revelation that changes everything he thought he knew about love, family, and loss. This is not just a story about wealth or pain. It's about the one truth we all seek: the power of connection that can heal even the deepest scars.